I want to take you through a typical broadcast day from 1939 to 42. First of all, how many hours would the station be broadcasting in a typical day back then?
To the best of my knowledge, we used to be on about 6 days a week, and it would depend entirely on, most of the early stuff would be remotes from some place or other. We would, we'd go out to the horse races out at Belmont or somewhere, and then in the afternoon, if that did not take up the whole day or the whole afternoon, the afternoon would be generally a variety type show that I mentioned before, and then early evening would be newscasts, and then after that would be again either a studio type variety show in which everybody dressed up in evening wear, tuxes for the men, and or the dramatic shows, and that would consist of the average day, I think.
So it would go on, what time would you sign on the TV station, would you say?
It would, we obviously weren't on from morning till night, but it would depend on what the earlier remote might have consisted of.
And
generally early afternoon.
And it would go off at what time around?
Oh, I would say 10, 11, often.
And in between shows, if you didn't have anything to shoot, the station simply shut off. Is that correct?
No, we generally ran the test pattern, and so that people could check their sets and at least see something on it. And somewhere along the line, I don't know whatever happened to it, but somebody had the idea that behind the test pattern I should run a DJ show, and thank goodness I don't think that ever took place. But it would have required, you know, a lot of extra time with picking records and talking about them and all that. So, but I think they ran some kind of music behind it.
There was a purpose to the test pattern, right? People could test their own sets.
Oh yeah, you could tune in the set.
Right.
You could literally tune in the set, which was very important because the test pattern went from you know, one corner to the other, and sometimes you got a clear picture in the middle and didn't work to the corners, but you could adjust your set with it. And also the big thing about it was the fact that we were on the air, that people with their sets realized, oh yeah, there's something, because the test pattern would also have the call letters, which at that time, even in the beginning, you know, was W2XBS, and later, after we finally got the commercial license, was WNBT.
And the test patterns also served a purpose for the dealers, no? They could show people in the stores. Sure,
the dealers who were demonstrating the sets said, see, that's television, even though it wasn't moving very much, but they could tune in their sets and show people that this thing was actually working.
Which is very important since RCA was trying to sell television.
They were trying very hard to sell their television sets. They actually, at one stage, there were 2 towns. Did I talk to you about this one time?
Tell us about it.
Well, there were 2 towns, New Brunswick, New Jersey, and I believe Newburgh, New York, were picked as typical towns. And sets were made available to all the people up there on a very, very reasonable basis. And they were the ones who were most responsible for sending in those cards. I used to make announcements all the time. Please send in your cards with your comments.
Explain the cards for us.
The card was a trifold which listed all the programs for the following week.
And who got the card?
And all these people who had sets, people could send in and request the cards, even though they were not in these 2 particular towns. There were a lot of sets around New York as well. And they could request the cards. And on one side of the trifold would be the programs that would be broadcast during that week. And then on the third fold was a piece that you could tear off and send in, because it was, I believe it was, had a stamp on it and everything. But it was like the forerunner of a rating system. It showed all the programs that we showed with 4 little squares next to it that they could check off. And it was poor, fair, good, excellent, in order. So all they had to do was look at the thing and remember, oh, art for art's sake, yeah, that was pretty good. They'd check it off with a good. And these cards would come in and give us an immediate audience response for what we had shown.
So everybody who had a television set would get one of these cards.
Would get one of these cards, that's right.
And you would, and particularly in these 2 towns, which were the first test-marketed towns for television.
Right.
Do you remember which shows particularly did well with the TV audience?
The ones that always got the highest ratings were the dramatic shows. And those always went over very well, because you saw action. You saw actors acting. And almost as good were the better variety shows with people that they might have known or remembered or seen.
Now, the cards would have the dates, the time that the show would be shown.
That's
but
right.
Often, you didn't time the shows that carefully, did you? A show often went shorter or longer than the scheduled time, you know?
That's where I would have to get on camera and say, due to the fact that it's raining out there, we're not going to go out to the ballpark. That would happen, and then we'd put a film on.
But you would have a boxing show or a baseball game or something like that necessarily ran to 2-hour time limit or time frame that maybe you had hoped it would run, no?
Right,
So
right.
shows didn't exactly run at the hour exactly straight up or straight down, did they?
I don't believe so.
No.
It would be more or less approximate, but it would still be something that they could check on.
Well, let's talk about some of the shows that you did. For instance, you'd go out to LaGuardia Airport, right, which was just opening then?
LaGuardia was, I say LaGuardia, everybody says LaGuardia, but LaGuardia himself said LaGuardia. So we got used to saying LaGuardia, but everybody, whoever flies now, says LaGuardia. But LaGuardia, even when he read the funny papers, one time, I don't know, a newspaper strike or something like that, but he got on the air and read the funny papers. So,
You'd go out to the airport?
We would drive out to the airport. Everybody'd go out there, all the mobile unit guys. Burke Crotty was the mobile unit director, and cameramen, and I would go out there, and we would do interviews with, I think there was a United Airlines plane or TWA plane at one stage that had come in specifically for that, and I would interview the various people involved.
What was the point?
It was a remote. They chose virtually anything that you could move the cameras out to do a TV show from.
Explain this mobile unit. What exactly was the mobile unit which they would take to these remotes?
The mobile unit consisted of 2 gigantic big blue trucks that held everything. One of them was the control room, and one of them was the technical part that held the cameras and the cables. And the cameras were immensely heavy things, and the cables were gigantic things, and also very, very heavy. And the guys worked like dogs to lug this stuff around. But that is what we would travel around in, and they became rather well known around the area, around New York. And
You would see the big blue truck parked.
you see those 2 big blue trucks and know that something was going to go on.
Ray, I forgot to ask you something. Did you go to the World's Fair and see the World's Fair television exhibit?
The World's Fair had already been running in '39 when television basically opened a lot of the things, and then it ran in 40 also. And we would go out there frequently and do shows from there.
Do you remember the RCA TV exhibit specifically, though?
Not really, not really. I'm not sure. I think we actually, we did a show from Gypsy Rose Lee's area, and that surprised
Did that create
everybody.
any
Oh,
problems?
sure. No, well, it was a little more sedate.
Uh-huh.
But
What about Billy Rose's Aquacade? Did they ever try to shoot that?
that I believe we did, and some of this stuff gets a little hazy after 60 years.
Now, you did a lot of sports events, right? Did you ever do a baseball game personally? Did you ever?
I remember working one time on a baseball game, even in the early days, and I think it was with Red Barber, who obviously did the game, but I sort of introduced the idea because we were, I believe, covering it at that time.
One of the historic firsts was a Columbia-Princeton baseball game done in 1939. Did you do that game? Would you have introduced that game?
I may or may not have. I may have introduced it from Radio City, but I don't remember going to it. But I did. I know I went to one up at Fordham, and we did a lot of different things, like we did fights and wrestling and all that kind of
You
stuff.
did horse racing too. Tell us about your horse racing.
Oh yes, oh yes. We used to go out to Belmont rather frequently to do the races, and we had cameras way up on the roof, and the man who did the races for us was a very famous, well-known race caller named Clem McCarthy. And Clem had binoculars that must have been 2 feet long. And Clem was awfully good. He was tremendous. But he was able to follow the races all the way from the beginning to the far side of the track and all the way around with these binoculars, which probably showed half a horse. But he was able to follow them all, and he could run them all. One time we went out there, and Clem wasn't going to be able to make it, but another guy named Jack McCarthy, who had been one of the junior announcers on Pat's staff, was supposed to call the race, and he was also quite good at it. And I was up on the roof with the engineers running the cameras, and Clem's binoculars, and a microphone, and word came through the wires to the cameraman, ain't nobody here. You're going to have to call the race.
Why was that? Because Jack McCarthy didn't
No,
show?
he didn't show. So I said, well, I'll try. So I got behind these glasses, and I thought, oh my gosh, I can't even really picture the whole racetrack. But in any case, I tried. And I followed these things around, and I said, they're at the starting gate, and tried very hard to sound like somebody who knew what he was doing. And they're at the starting gate, and they're off. And then I followed them around, finally got to the far side of the track, and I lost them. Totally lost the whole bunch of horses. And I said, I don't know where they are. I can't find them. And I made no effort to excuse it or anything, because I don't know where they went. So finally, when they got around to almost to the finish line, I found them again. That was a little embarrassing, but...
You also had trouble with the hockey match too, right? First time?
One time, Burke Crotty said, oh, we're going to do ice hockey, and you might as well take a crack at it. And I said, I don't know anything about hockey. I'd never seen a hockey match in my life. And he said, yeah, but we're going to do it, and you might as well do it because you're the only guy we have. So we went over to Madison Square Garden, got set up, and I tried my best to find out and realize what was going on. And again, got lost. I I didn't know where the puck went. I didn't realize who was on it, who had it. And I finally said something that I'd heard before in the past, deep into the Ranger end zone. And at the end of the thing, Burke said, yeah, you know, that sounded pretty good when you said deep into the Ranger end zone. I think you better try it again. And I said, Burke, at least give me a break. Let me find out what hockey's all about. So the next time I do this, I won't look and sound quite so stupid. So he said, okay. Well, we did it one more time. But hockey's rather a fast-moving sport, as you know. And it's a little difficult. But it was, and we covered it quite a few times. It was when the Rangers were playing the Montreal Canadiens. And the Rangers had a guy named Neil Colville and Mac Colville, who were brothers, and they more or less did most of the work on the Ranger team. But how long we did that after that, I don't know. I think they finally got somebody who knew what he was doing.
You would work with an assistant sometime, and I think you've told me before about mic fright. There were times when these people... Mic fright is a problem on live television, isn't it? Especially for people who are just beginning.
It's a problem for everybody at one time or other, if you're honest. There's some time along the line where suddenly everything goes blank and anxiety takes over and you go cuckoo. So one time when I was working this I think took place after the war, but I worked with a guy named Bob Stanton, who did most of the announcing on boxing matches. And he would do the rounds. He would do the actual boxing match, and I did the color between rounds. And at one point, a gentleman named Paul Alley, who did the NBC newsreel, which was on, I think, every night. And at one stage he said, gee, I'd like to go out to the boxing matches with you sometime. Well, Bob Stanton happened to be out of town. So it fell to me to do the actual match that was going on. And Paul wanted to come out and do what I normally did with Bob and sit alongside and do the between round stuff. In my case, I always used to go to the dressing rooms and interview the guys and know a little bit about them so that when the mic came to me after the round, I'd know something about them. And this one time, when Paul came out there, I said, and now, after the round, I said, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce a man whom you've heard for a very long time, and who is here with me tonight, and he's the fellow who normally does the NBC newsreel. And I said, and here is Paul Alley. I handed him the mic, and Paul, for some reason, because it was such a totally different new medium for him, said, glub, 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 and simply couldn't get a word out. And it was one of those peculiar things. He was just not used to it. And of course it had happened to me a few times before.
Did he ever get a word out the whole fight?
I don't think he said a word all night.
Now, some of the things you also did, you put cameras up in a plane? You went up in a plane?
Yes, this again is pre-war. We went out to LaGuardia one time and got a United Airlines research plane, and somebody thought it would be a good idea to try to get a signal out from about 3,000 feet up. I worked in the cabin with a camera so they could shoot me once in a while doing telling what we were looking at. So I even had a receiver so I could see what they were looking at. And a good friend of mine, an engineer named Stan Peck, was in the door of the baggage compartment. And they strapped him in and wired him in along with a big Orthicon camera. And this poor guy, all the time we were up, was hanging onto the camera, trying to keep it from going out, and while we were flying all around showing what you could see from the air.
Hanging out of the airplane almost.
Not, well, he was strapped in. Fortunately, he had some heavy clothes on, but he was literally strapped into something inside the airplane so he wouldn't fall out. But he was still hanging onto that camera for dear life. But what surprised everybody was that by being 3,000 feet up, the signal went not only to the television station, but could be seen as far away as Schenectady, because it was so far up, and normally you could broadcast only line of sight because it was FM kind of signal. And that particular time, they could see it all the way up in Schenectady and the other end of Long Island.
You announced a Seder?
We, at one time, decided it might be a good idea to do some religious programming, which we did on Sunday mornings, and especially on holiday time. So I came Easter one time. We did a Protestant religious service. Came Passover. We did the Passover service and Seder. And then on another Sunday, we did a Catholic service with Fulton J. Sheen, who didn't he become a bishop, I think? He was Monsignor Sheen at the time, an exceptionally handsome man. And when he used to come to the studio to do a radio broadcast, the floors would be lined with adoring women who thought he was the most handsome thing that had ever lived. And he was awfully good. He was a very good communicator.
What a waste, as they would say, though, I guess.
Oh, dear.
But the page and guide shows were something else that you used to do?
We used to do occasionally a thing called Brass Buttons Review, in which the pages and guides, dressed in their everyday uniforms, did a show, a variety, singing, whatever kind of show. A fellow named Earl Wrightson was always the star because he was a very fine singer and did a good job. And I forget who else was on it offhand.
So they were really just trying to televise anything to fill up the schedule, right?
We did anything that you could take a picture of. And that was what the remotes all meant. We actually went to a public swimming pool at one time and showed people diving and jumping around and doing stuff like that. But it was one of the things that I think was so effective and so important in those early days that showed that you could go places with this. And this was with the most cumbersome equipment that you can imagine. What they can do today with cameras is unbelievable, with the camcorders and what have you.
It's a challenge to you to narrate a public swimming pool show, I imagine.
I think we got a couple of fancy divers, for one thing, just to do this, but it was fun to do.
Oh. So it wasn't like, oh, there's little Johnny Jones doing a cannonball. Let's watch him do it.
Not really. I don't believe it was that. I think we rigged up some kind of a schedule.
And one of the problems you had was parking that thing, right? I mean, was it legal to park? Did you have to get special permission to park the...
Do I have to tell you that?
Yes, you did.
When we did the boxing matches for Madison Square Garden, I noticed that Burke Crotty, who was the producer, always got there because we had to park those two great big giant blue trucks right next to Madison Square Garden, which was at 50th and 8th Avenue, I believe, at the time. And I said, Burke, what do you get? You always have a pocket full of money. What is that for? What's it like 5s and 10s and things like that? And he said, you'll see. Because it was absolutely illegal to park those trucks on 50th, I think it was 50th Street, wherever we parked them. And pretty soon, he started handing out these bills to the people who were obligated to ticket those trucks and get them off the street. And that was the only way that we could ever produce shows from Madison Square Garden.
Give us a sense of how many people you think were watching television at this point. Any idea?
I think probably 5,000-6,000 people, which seems like nothing today, but these were included among those towns that were saturated to the best of our ability with television sets like New Brunswick or Newburgh.
And they were all in the immediate New York area. There was no networking of any of your shows at that point.
The first real network television show that we did happened to be in 1940 when we did the convention. Have I mentioned that before?
I want to talk about that in a minute, but I want to
Okay.
get back to something else first. Did you ever have any feedback? How did you have a sense? Was there a first time that you had a sense that people were actually watching you on the air? Did you have personal feedback from people?
In a way.
Tell us that.
Well, it's an odd story, but I never realized that at that time, even though it was not very much, and it was an interesting time. Among other things, you know, we had the 6th Avenue L run right in front of our building, but not making a lot of money. I did most of my eating at an automat, which was on 50th Street, a couple of doors up from 6th Avenue. And I was eating my evening meal or whatever I was in there for, and suddenly a bunch of people who were not far away kept looking at me. And I thought, there's something strange. Did I have something on my face? Do I look strange or whatever? Turned out that they were television viewers and who recognized me, and I thought, gosh, that's funny. I have to be more careful, because I realized that some people are liable to recognize me, which up until then had never happened to me before. But
did people call you? I think I read a report where people would call and ask you for
that did
directions.
happen. Oh, people asked me how do you get into New York. I actually got several invites to come to dinner somewhere.
Why was that?
I don't know. I think people, as I guess maybe you have realized, my approach was never that of a person that you had to stay away from. My approach was always, from the time I first got on the air in television, was as natural as I could get. Up until then, most of the announcers, all the big wheel announcers, were very formal, very elegant, and I could never do that because it wasn't my nature to talk in that manner.
So you developed your own personal style.